Hello and welcome. This is the 14th Connected Learning TV webinar. This is Howard Reingold. I'm going to host today. You can continue your conversation after today on Jeff Sturges' webinar page at www.connectedlearning.tv and by using the Twitter hashtag #ConnectedLearning. And our next webinar will be Thursday, June 21st at 9 a.m. with Cheryl Nussbaum Beach and Will Richardson of the Powerful Learning Practice Network. Don't miss that. We're going to try some experiments today with the community. We're really eager to get our community to participate while we're doing this and not just be passive observers. So today we're going to be talking with Jeff Sturges about strengthening communities with makerspaces. How can makerspaces build community, excite peer learning, and drive entrepreneurial experimentation? Let's see. There's a...
I'm Jeff.
Are you going to get the link to the webinar page, John, and put that into the chat? So those of you who are in the live stream chat, I would like to give you some opportunities to participate here. Right now we've got a document. It's a Google Doc that why don't we try to do a summary of what looks to be useful, what we would like to carry away with us from this in that Google Doc. This is not a formal publication. This is just an experiment to see whether the folks who are actively chatting can also make some notes. So the Google Doc I will put into the chat. It doesn't seem to want me to put it in the chat. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yeah, that's the group Google Doc. So let's, there's no rules. Let's just mess with it. And if it ends up messy, we will reorder it. So think of it as a sandbox, a place to make notes, to pull information from the chat that we want to have as a more permanent record. And why don't we get to the business of the day here before Jeff talks. Jeff's going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we're going to converse. It's the usual format that we have for these things, a fishbowl. We've got a number of respondents here in Hangout, and of course we will relay some of the questions that you have in the live stream chat. So why don't you briefly introduce yourselves? Andrew, you want to start with you?
Sure. My name is Andrew Schrock. I'm a PhD student at the University of Southern California. I am part of the Annenberg Innovation Lab, and I do some work with Henry Jenkins. I'm TAing for him next semester, and I'm part of his research group called Civic Paths. And hackerspaces and makerspaces are one of my areas of interest so far as the research I'm doing and what I like to think about.
All right, welcome. Tara?
Hello, I'm Tara Brown, and I'm in Los Angeles. I'm working also on a project at the USC Annenberg Innovation Lab. I'm also working at UC Irvine with the Digital Media Learning Group. For this conversation, though, we're working in the planning stages of building up a kid-friendly hackerspace or makerspace here in Los Angeles. So I'm excited to be here.
And Shelley?
Mic's off.
You're muted, Shelley. You need to turn your mic back on.
There you go. I'm Shelley Kapler, and I am from Tampa, Florida. And we have two groups here that are trying to work together to bring a makerspace to Tampa for the first time. We recently had a maker fair, and my background is I am a 7-year FIRST robotics coach. and my background is in city recreation and parks. So I am interested in the conversation to know how to bring the community makerspace in with possibly the city, and how do you keep that sustained long term?
Okay, great. We've got a lot of interesting folks today. Let's try to get to everyone, and let's start with Jeff.
Hey,
Take it away.
thank you. Well, I'm really happy to have everyone here. Really happy to share everything that I can to help other people start their own makerspaces, or however they wish to define them. A little bit about me and my history with makerspaces and Fab Labs and hackerspaces. I was part of the GreenFab program and also the Sustainable South Bronx Fab Lab in the South Bronx prior to moving to Detroit. I was also one of the early members of NYCResistor in New York, or in Brooklyn rather. And these experiences really inspired me to start a makerspace, really with a focus on youth in Detroit. As part of that process, I ended up also co-founding a hackerspace in Detroit called OmniCorpDetroit, and starting those two things at about the same time was a little bit insane, but also really amazing in terms of what I learned about both from a startup stage and also the resources that were shared between the two. So happy to elaborate on that if that's appropriate. And also, I think through this, I'd like to get a lot of WH questions answered for people: who, what, where, why, when, how, in terms of the Mount Elliott Makerspace, but also assisting people with their startups, and also maybe defining makerspace, hackerspace, and Fab Labs to help people better understand what the difference is or how they can kind of all encompass things. But those experiences, I learned about the Fab Lab some time ago. I'd say the Fab Lab is a major inspiration for what I'm doing, and that started back in 2000. And now we've seen, through Make Magazine and through the open source software and hardware movements, it's really put us in an interesting time to really rethink how we're learning, rethink about making things, rethink entrepreneurship, how we can actually make our own stuff much more readily than we ever could. So I think it's a powerful time for makerspaces, and it's definitely the right time to start developing them both as community centers, but also places for maybe more formal and informal learning. How's that, Howard? I can do more if you'd like.
Why don't you do a little bit more about the how-to? I think people are interested in doing this themselves. What can you tell us about starting them?
Can you answer Andrew's question that we had asked earlier, the difference between a hackerspace and a makerspace?
Yeah, I think that would be a good start. So let's start actually with Fab Lab, since that's what I learned about first, and that I think is probably one of the, well, aside from hackerspaces, it's one of the older models. So a Fab Lab is it can be considered a community workshop with a standard set of tools. And originally a Fab Lab started out with, as I understand, a 3D router, a CNC router, which is, for those who don't know, it's kind of a computer-controlled drill which can shape three-dimensional objects, a CNC laser cutter, which can cut two-dimensional objects, a circuit board, a mini mill, which was able to cut out circuit boards and also cut out smaller 3D objects, and a vinyl cutter, which is able to cut not only vinyl, vinyl stencils, but also cut copper foil to make what was called flexible circuits. I believe that's been since expanded to include 3D printers, plasma cutters, all sorts of different gadgets as they've been emerging. But the idea is that there is a standard, common, shared set of tools, which is a great thing because there are over 100, or I think there could be almost 200, but there's definitely over 100 Fab Labs globally. And they do have a shared set of tools and software to use those tools. So you could be making something in Boston, you could go to Iceland, and then you could go to Indonesia and make the same thing with the same tools, or share your files so that that your design can be replicated. So it's very powerful. I think one of the limitations is that generally a startup Fab Lab is considered to be fairly expensive. The tools are going down in price, but in order to really be a Fab Lab, you do need that standard tool set. So I think that's probably a challenge, or it could be considered a challenge of Fab Labs, is the price. But these things are all changing. So that would be a Fab Lab. A hackerspace, as it's conventionally known, is also a community workshop of sorts, which really started with the 80s hackerspace movements in Germany. And these were spaces where particularly software and computer programmers would get together to share resources and knowledge, resources being computers, and space to develop their skills and to do sometimes nefarious things like breaking into banks. So while that's the unfortunate and common association with hackerspaces as something happening illegally, I think we're trying to redefine the word hacking to include taking something that exists and changing it into something else, or changing it into something that you desire that it should be. So a lot of people hesitate in calling their space a hackerspace because of that connotation, which I think is unfortunate, and I think a lot of us do a lot of work to transform that word into something that is positive. A makerspace, I think, I at least originally defined the Mount Elliott Makerspace as a makerspace because I wanted to avoid the connotation of a hackerspace, and we did have a particular focus on community and even a deeper focus on youth. So I wanted it to be as general as possible. We're going in a space where we're making things, so that's simple. So I associated makerspace with more of a mission-driven space that is community-based, but I really think makerspace as the word and definition is beginning to evolve into a word that really includes all of these things. It's, you know, makerspace could be a fab lab, it could be a hackerspace, it could be a community workshop, it could be a school workshop. I think it could be whatever. So when I use the word makerspace now, it's the big circle that I draw around everything, and everything within that is a makerspace. I think there is, I guess, some branding of the word makerspace by Make Magazine, but I think even Make Magazine would agree makerspace is not a word that is owned by Make Magazine. It is something that they're passionate about, of course, because the name Make is in the word makerspace, but also because Dale Doherty and others are passionate about people learning and doing things and making, you know, prototypes in spaces where you make things. So that's kind of a general overview, and if anyone has any other words they want to throw out or wants to clarify the definitions, at least as they exist now, and no doubt will change, I'd be happy to do that. And to follow on this too, if we want to discuss the definitions a little bit more, that's great. If not, I can kind of launch into how we started the Mount Elliott Makerspace and OmniCorp, if that would be helpful.
I had a quick question, if that's okay. Were you the first to use Makerspace with Mount Elliott, or are there other spaces that were using that term?
I doubt we were the first. I believe that Milwaukee Makerspace was a place that called itself a makerspace, but you know, who knows who the first person that was used it, and quite frankly, I don't really care who's the first to anything. I just figure it's a space where we make stuff, and that sounds like a good word. So, you know,
I mean, I'm just wondering if it was like you, like, hey, I like this model that someone else is using that's very youth focused, and you know.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of Makerspace being used for a mission-driven, youth-focused space. I just said, hey, Makerspace, you know, it's just like hackerspace. We're substituting hacker for maker. And but I would imagine at the time somebody else had called it something. I'm pretty sure the Milwaukee Makerspace, which is more along the lines of a hackerspace, as far as I know, and that's in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I imagine they may have had it before we did, and there's probably something before that.
Maybe another, I also sort of just have a question / comment. So to bring it back to kind of the connected learning idea, it seems like hackerspaces are attracting and encourage a kind of connectivity to a type of community, but it's a very different type of community than I see in the Mount Elliott Makerspace. I see very much kind of a local, geographically proximate kind of community space. Is it in a church? Is that where the space is, or?
Yes. So the Mount Elliott Makerspace is in the basement of a church, and there was a very deliberate reason why I decided to do that. It wasn't actually the original choice or the first choice, but I can tell you it was easily one of the best choices that we ended up making to do that. Originally, when I moved to Detroit, I was planning and I budgeted for and applied for a grant to start another Fab Lab. So complete with the same budget that is usually for a startup Fab Lab. But what changed is through conversations with parents, and also through multiple failed real estate deals, and also encountering lots of buildings that need a lot more build out than I had budgeted for. I realized that we should one, start with the least expensive tools, and two, find a place that already has existing community energy or emerging community energy. So I was referred to this church because people said, hey, this is a church, they're doing great things, their pastor's awesome, you should go check it out. I hesitated in doing so because I wanted to try to make sure that there was not a religious association with what we were doing, because I felt that that might be exclusive. My favorite quote from Pastor Barry, when I said that flat out to him, I said, you know, I was concerned about the religious association. He said, we're not religious, we're Episcopalian. So I had to look up what Episcopalian truly meant in that respect, but apparently people were telling me it's like Catholic or Christian light. And it's definitely, you know, that's, at least in the case of this church is more of a community center. And as is the case in many areas in Detroit, there's not a lot of population, but people do congregate in churches. I mean, churches are becoming kind of community centers in Detroit. So with that existing community activity and connection, putting a makerspace in an area like that, and you know, this could be a community center, school, whatever, just in our case it was a church, that has turned out to be incredibly valuable, because I do a lot less outreach than I would otherwise need to do. You're already accessing a pool of parents and kids, and you're also in a place where the work of the young people and the older people is being celebrated by their community. So you can't control what happens at home for a lot of people, or for anybody for that matter. That's just a whole separate effort if one wanted to do that. But in this place where people are celebrated for what they do, that really stimulates more action and more work and more interactivity. And you know, people see one person be successful or make something and they want to do it too. There is this kind of positive Me Too situation that we've created, and it's really taking off. I mean, I could name a number of examples where this has worked. In addition, because churches have a weekly meeting that they call service or mass, this is the best time ever to kind of have a venue for not only making announcements, but also celebrating people's work. So at the end of I actually work Sunday through Thursday rather than Monday through Friday, because that allows me to go to, I mean, I usually am working Friday and Saturdays anyways these days, but working Sunday through Thursday allows me, as my first day of the week, to go to the service to make announcements and also highlight the work that people are doing, but also to solicit interest in other things that we're trying to work on. A good, for instance, is, hey, folks, we've got a screen printing studio. You know, some people have been using it, but I mean, is anyone interested in learning screen printing? And you know, and then you have to explain what screen printing is and how it could be valuable. Which then starts getting people thinking. And it's, you know, I think originally I thought, oh, people would be racing to this in droves all at once. But actually, you know, here we are now defining what a makerspace is amongst each other, and this is even more challenging in an area where the digital divide is so, I guess, so obvious. It's, we're trying to explain and help people understand what a makerspace is and how it can be valuable to them, and slowly but surely it's working. I mean, it's not just youth that are getting involved in amazing stuff, it's actually adults who are saying, hey, I want to make some furniture, or I want to restore furniture, or I want to make t-shirts, or you know, I want to customize my bike. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that's happening because of this, I guess, orbit that we formed around the makerspace, and its gravitational pull is starting to pull more people in.
So do you have, so you said it's very youth focused, but you have families, adults also coming into your space working on stuff?
Yeah, it's completely intergenerational, and that was the intent from the outset. There are certainly plenty of challenges associated with that, especially with teenagers, because when you've got kids around teenagers, teenagers are like, yo, this isn't cool. You know, so you do have to set aside time for you know, sometimes certain groups of teenagers to kind of do their own thing and feel like they've got the space to themselves, especially if they're making music or doing something creative where they're really not sure of themselves and they're trying to establish their identity. So, you know, the easiest group to work with is kids age 0, well, let's not say age 0, age probably 4 or 5 and up. We have kids that are as young as 4 and 5 in there. We teach them to solder. You know, if they're really well behaved, they can stay with very limited adult supervision. If they're a pain in the butt, we tell them to shape up, or they gotta leave, or you know, find their parents or brothers and sisters. They'll take care of them. And then up until about 12 or 14, that's when the kids are still not as self-conscious, so they're much easier to work with. They're much open to things. They're the most productive kids in the space. And then as soon as that you venture into the teen years, it becomes more challenging. So I guess the challenging group is 18 or 14 to 18, and then there are of course exceptions, and then even 18 to 25, particularly amongst African American males in Detroit. It's a challenging area. But then after that point, you got adults and young adults that are getting involved in things, helping us teach, helping us keep everybody under control, and getting involved in stuff. So it's there's even a greater mix than that. I'm trying to pull in people that are high school grads, university students, because obviously we have a brain drain problem in Detroit. So one way to get people engaged and involved and perhaps stay in Detroit is plug them into these makerspaces where they have an opportunity to not only teach, but work on their own stuff. I mean, if we've got the tools and fun stuff for them to prototype whatever they're doing, or even just to have some fun, and we can maybe even provide them with a little bit of income so that it's their bread and butter while they're exploring either an art practice or an entrepreneurial endeavor or whatever. It's possible to keep them in Detroit for a while, have them feel good about contributing their skills to a valuable organization and effort, and also give them the time and the space to develop some ideas which could be really valuable to the region inevitably. And also getting retirees involved is another great source of skills and talent and energy. We have a guy in the Makerspace who's a retired CNC machine programmer and engineer, and I mean, this guy is incredible. He built our entire wood shop on a volunteer basis. He's been doing it for a year. I didn't have budget to pay anyone to build the wood shop, and he and I ended up meeting in the church at the same time. He said, "Hey, I want to build a wood shop." I said, "Hey, we're building a makerspace. I want a wood shop, but I don't know when we'll get to it." So I had put in our budget some materials and tools, and he uses it, but he also pulls all of his own tools in. It's amazing. I mean, I couldn't even explain. You'd have to see it to see how amazing the work is that this guy's done. And I don't even really task him with anything. I just say, do whatever you want, and he helps people out in the church naturally. A lot of these things happen naturally.
Are everybody volunteers, or do you actually have staff?
No, we do have staff, and I'm happy to talk about, I think, Shelley, you mentioned, which is an important one, different models, sustainability, how these things can possibly work. I'd happily talk about different models. I'm really fortunate with the Makerspace. We were supported by a $200,000 grant from the Kresge Foundation. That was actually a startup and first year's operation for the Fab Lab. I have since stretched that into what will probably be 2.5 years. And that is myself being paid full-time, and also another gentleman which was paid full-time for about 1.5 years who's now part-time. So the model that I'm working on now is, I think there will always have to be 1 or 2 people paid full-time, depending on how big you get, to manage things if you're doing it in this way. And then everybody else, I think it could be 1 person per concentration. We actually have multiple concentrations, which I'll mention. They could be hired part-time to kind of handle those things and coordinate volunteers. So we do have volunteers that participate, but coordinating volunteers, tasking them with things, making sure that they're doing good stuff, that is a whole set of responsibilities unto itself. So there's now that I've been doing it for 2 years, I can understand where the things that personally I can't do or just don't have the time. And what are the things that might fit somebody's time schedule, set of expertise, etc. And also where you can overlap, especially in an area of economic challenge, always hiring people from outside the community is a terrible idea. You're not really creating, I think, lasting change if you're just going to hire people from outside the community that you know. So trying to fold in people that have certain sets of expertise and then people that may not have the expertise but knowledge of the community, how we can make that happen, and pay people appropriately and openly. That's another quick thing is all of our finances are totally transparent. So everyone knows what everyone's paid, and I think that's important, especially when people are paid different amounts and you want volunteers to participate actively. So that was a lot, but
So how many people do you have in the space at any given time? Because I'm kind of curious, the ratios with when you're having kids, especially younger kids, and like the supervision that's required and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's an important question. So originally we were open as often as possible, and then I realized I couldn't really get anything done. So we have open times, but also, so for instance, our open times right now are Tuesdays 4 to 6, Thursdays 4 to 6, Saturdays 11 to 5, and Sundays 1:30, which is after the service, until 6 o'clock. But the important thing to mention is because we set this space up in an existing community space, anyone has access to it whenever they want, and they just go through the church leadership. And a lot of this access is, if it's like teenagers coming in, or kids with odd schedules, or kids that might have dropped out of school but need access to a computer, they go down there and they use it. We do lock up stuff that is expensive and easily brought to the pawn shop and traded, because we have had problems with theft. So, we have problems with theft in the South Bronx. There's ways to get around this, and being inside of a community space like a church, it's harder for people to haul out something as big as a computer, but it's very easy for somebody to haul out a laptop if they just stick it in their bag. So I think there's different ways you can kind of control that. Now, during the open shop times, we have at least one person, and preferably multiple people on duty, I guess, watching. So on a given Saturday, I actually have an intern who's 17 years old watching the space, and we have adults check in periodically. And we've met with some challenges with that, because he doesn't always feel like he can kind of lay down the law if somebody's doing something wrong. So we may change that up a little bit. But if you have adult volunteers, that's very helpful. So we could have as few as 5 people in the space, or as many as 45. I mean, sometimes on Sundays and Saturdays it swells, and there's tons of people there. And I can run around and do it myself, but it's kind of insane. I do try to have a couple more adult figures in the space whenever possible. And I also have older people manage younger people. So I'll deliberately ask. I'll be like, hey, we're shorthanded today. I mean, right now we're quote unquote shorthanded because I'm operating on fairly limited funds now. So I just ask people to help out, and people do help out. And when people ask me stuff, I ask them to ask somebody else. I think you are trying to establish a community that people can tap from, and you're not trying to make yourself the focal point of the makerspace. If you do that, then when you eventually move on, or if something happens, then the makerspace falls apart. So it's got to be a self-sustaining community, not only financially, but people-wise as well. So it's important.
Do you charge memberships?
At the Mount Elliott Makerspace, we don't. We were thinking of starting that. I just don't know that we're ready for it yet. The community in which we work in Detroit, probably a lot of people would have a tough time with that, but I'm not so sure either. I think what I have discovered is people are able to find money for stuff that they find valuable. We used to offer free workshops. We now charge for our workshops. I mean, it's a fairly nominal fee, but that keeps people participating and valuing the workshop. So it's kind of we ride a fine line between wanting to have this be an open, accessible space and being able to drive towards sustainability. So it is a big challenge, especially in an area like this, where if people don't have access to the computers in this space, they may not easily get access to computers or the internet. So to charge people a membership for this is, when they're trying to use the computer to find a job so they can get money, it's kind of a rub. So we're not sure what to do about that yet. We may do like basic membership during certain hours, and then preferred membership gets you other perks. And we do, however, not much, but a little bit of money off of our workshops and off of selling things like headphones, CDs, ink for screen printing, copies, printing, that sort of thing. So I don't think it's enough to keep us sustainable with me working full-time and maybe another person working part-time, but it's a starting point, and we're hoping to get more closer towards that. I think in an area of economic challenge, it's going to be really tough to sustain it in the same way that one could sustain a hackerspace. In a hackerspace, again, using this model of people that are generally 18 or over and getting together, splitting the costs of rent and overhead in order to have a space to make things. So, and I can talk more about what I foresee, I think coming off of what Shelley was wondering, is how you could start a financially sustainable space that does what the Mount Elliott Makerspace does, but also can do a lot of what a hackerspace does.
Right. So, I mean, I have a question, Jeff, and maybe Tara can sort of have some input is, I mean, there's kind of an idea, I think, of two different maker spaces. You have one that is kind of a distinct place where you are introducing people to technology, and that is garnered maybe more towards families and that type of thing. And then I see a maker space where you are attracting people who are already interested in technology, and you are giving them a place to access it.
Sure.
So
Well,
is there a way that you see going forward for maker spaces that are combining those two target audiences?
I see a more ideal model as being something like this. For me, I think it's better to not have to ask for funding for anything. I like things that work for themselves. That's great. I didn't really understand that might be possible at the time that I started these up. I was really only familiar with, in a tough neighborhood, you do a grant funding thing, and amongst your friends or whatever, you can probably support it yourself. So I think I learned a lot by starting the hackerspace and the makerspace, or the OmniCorp hackerspace and the Mount Elliott Makerspace at the same time. The reason why I kicked off OmniCorp was because I didn't know when grant funding would come through for the Mount Elliott Makerspace. So I said, well, hey, I want to start this thing no matter what. So maybe what we could do is we could have a hackerspace that people use during the evenings and the weekends, which is the most common time for people to use them. And then during the day, we might be able to offer something to a whole different segment of people. Now, I was kind of starting to work on that model because hackerspaces have this underutilized capacity during the day. In most cases, it depends where you are and what type of work people do. But I did receive the grant funding, so and the grant funding was tied to a particular area, so I really would have had a lot of difficulty holding the two together. However, if I was to recommend another model to somebody, I would say start by gathering a group of people who are passionate about the idea of having a space, and I was talking with Tara about this recently, is having a space where you can work and make things, might be kind of family-based, and also having a space where during the day you might be able to introduce that to other people and drive revenue that way. So I think the best way to start is by memberships and by people putting in a hunk of money at first to kind of support the establishment of an organization, any type of makerspace. That's how we started OmniCorp. That's how we started NYCResistor. It was, NYCResistor was 10 people that got together. They ponied up, I think, 1,000 or more each, and they set up an LLC, and then they brought in 10 of their friends, and they brought in 10 more friends, and so forth. So they started like having kind of meeting groups with each other to kind of figure out who was interested in that idea, and then they expanded their network once they had kind of built a strong culture and a strong shared vision, which I think is critically, extremely important in order to get in people that everyone feels comfortable with. Which is a very big, important part of hackerspaces, I think, but other people are radically inclusive, and there are different models, so this isn't the only way. But the other part of that is, I think, once you've got that core together and you've kind of, you've kicked it off, is then I think that I pretty much put up a spreadsheet in front of a group of people and said, this is how much I think it's going to cost, per month. And in Detroit, we charge everyone $95 a month, and we need about 25 members to sustain ourselves. We have about 30 members, and that keeps the lights on, that pays our rent, and we have a great space, and perhaps only in Detroit could you have such a big space to do this. But I don't think that has to be a model that only someone in Detroit could use. I mean, NYCResistor is the same thing. I think the dues are about $100 a month. Their space is much smaller because it's New York, and they have, I think, maybe 40 or 50 members. So, and that membership allows people to access the space during any hours, but also use the equipment and so forth. And some things, you do charge a fee for to make sure that you're paying for stuff. But to mix the two models, like kind of a mission-driven educational space and a hackerspace, I think then maybe a few of those people within their network could be the people that are providing programming or doing certain things during underutilized times in the space. So if you are offering workshops, if more on a formal basis, I mean, hackerspaces do that anyways, and they usually split the money 50-50 with the space, between the space and the instructor. That's one model. I mean, I think actually just building a pro forma model of these things is really a good way to go, and exploring possible ways to charge money. You know, doing dinners. You could actually using the space to hold events. You know, you can drive a lot of money that way. But I think there's various ways to financially sustain a space that does both. You know, that kind of exists as like Mount Elliott does, and exists the way OmniCorp does. I think the challenge, and something that I would emphasize doing at the forefront, is exploring a lot of those options before you get started. I think it's, in the case of the Mount Elliott Makerspace, it's very difficult for us to go in the reverse. It's like pricing a product too low and then trying to price it up higher. You know, you're gonna lose your customer base. So for us, the challenge for us is figuring out ways to, you know, to start working towards sustainability without any grant funding. I don't know that that's entirely possible given the clientele that we serve, but it's definitely something that I'm working hardcore to explore. However, in maybe more middle or upper class neighborhoods in the country, that might be a little bit easier, especially maybe with access to state or federal funding related to educational initiatives, both after school, during school, and or all the above, after school, during school, and summertime programming. So I think there are opportunities that I have not yet explored in order to kind of help make that possible.
There's some questions and comments from the live stream. One of them is, what issues would there be with starting a makerspace in a VOTEC urban school that could be shared with the community? If cost is not an issue, what equipment should we look at?
So I think I spoke earlier about or maybe I didn't, but the elements of a makerspace that I usually think about when we first start discussing is people, space, and tools. And I was talking about this with Andrew earlier. To me, absolutely the first point is the people, getting together people with a shared vision. You know, it not being a large group to start. You know, I think, you know, a smaller group is better to start, refine the vision, and then kind of start to expand your network. Space will end up being defined by the people, and as will the tools and the projects. So there is kind of a mix of this, though. You know, there's the sort of, if you build it, they will come, versus, you know, we will build it and then we will ask others to come sort of thing. I think both models can work potentially. I'm particularly passionate about the people-centered approach because that's been my experience, and I think I've seen other models that started with space and tools first, and I think that maybe it's not quite as rich as the experiences that I've been a part of. But I think the tech shop model is a very interesting one, where they do supply the tools and the resources at the outset, you know, and then they're looking for people to fill in the space, and that's been successful for them too. So, you know, I think in the case of, you know, I went to the San Francisco tech shop and it was bustling in the middle of the day on Thursday. So, you know, and they provide a set of tools that apparently everybody in the area is taking advantage of. I mean, I think there was not a tool that was going unused in that tech shop. So I think that's awesome. But I would hesitate, you know, if someone's starting a makerspace in a VOTEC school, I think that's an awesome idea, and I think there's probably a lot of tools and resources already there. The problems you would encounter, aside from cost, I think would be liability and access. I know that in a lot of schools, the difficulty is, you know, if public people are coming into the school and they're not paying, you know, for, I guess, tuition, are they covered under your liability insurance, which is an important thing to consider. And also, when can they access the space, you know, and is whatever they exchange for use of the space, be it membership or work or whatever, would that be worth it to them if they only had limited hours of access? A lot of people, you know, for a lot of people, Makerspace is their quote-unquote third place, their social condenser. And so as a third place and kind of a third priority, it usually means they're going to be there after hours or, you know, beyond work time. So that usually means evenings and weekends. Are VOTEC schools open during those hours? I guess probably most of them are, because it's education people are usually utilizing to outside of their jobs to perhaps get another job. But those are just things to consider. So yeah, getting back to the tools, I would, you know, I'm given my experience, I just hesitate on purchasing tools until you figure out a little bit more about what people are interested in, and that guides the tool purchase. At OmniCorp, we did not start with, you know, a bunch of amazing tools. People just started bringing their tools in, and you decided what you would share and what you would not share. I highly recommend only sharing the big tools because the small tools end up going missing or people forget to put them back. So everybody getting their own toolbox and with maybe one shared common set of tools that are cheap worked out pretty well. But I think beyond that, like if you want to make, I mean, a laser cutter is a very universal tool, but it's also very expensive. Beyond that, more specialty tools like mills and lathes, I would base those decisions on who's going to use them and if they're going to use them. Otherwise, they end up being big tools that collect dust.
I just wanted to add, so just in sort of some of our planning in Los Angeles, we're doing a bunch of pop-up events in different locations around the city. One is to sort of figure out, where the population of LA, wants to partake in these types of things. So, for example, we're just doing a hackathon later on this month, but we're also talking about having something focused around Arduino soon at another location. The Central Library is interested in getting the MakerBot Club together and seeing which kids show up for that to learn more. So I think like having access to clubs that maybe you can do events with and sort of garner interest through that is one way to do it too, where you don't have to buy equipment because you already, you're reaching out to people who already have it.
Yeah, to follow on that, I think a lot of people think of a makerspace in terms of how do I get the tools in the space first, and I really think you're better served exploring existing spaces, existing tools, and existing people with talent to start to build a community of people first. Keep the cost as low as possible at the outset. And I think the organic growth model ends up having a higher likelihood of sustainability because you're discovering and learning things and making mistakes as you go on a really, on a nice pace. And you'll find too that people, especially if you're good at social networking, which sadly I am not, but friends of mine are. So, the word starts to spread a little bit, and you'll start. I mean, it really, I kind of get all interplanetary and all this stuff about this, but you're creating these celestial bodies that are creating orbits that are gravitation. People will start to attract what you're doing, or start to be attracted to what you're doing because you're building this really positive energy around an idea. And other people come out of the woodwork saying, hey, you know what, I've always been looking for this, or I've been making stuff in my house for a while, and I don't really want to do it alone anymore, and I've got tools, or you can use my garage to start. So it's, in the case of NYCResistor, we were doing small workshops, or, this is even before I got more formally involved. Bree Pettis was running small workshops in various places around the city to kind of gather together people and figure out who wanted to do what, who was really deeply interested, and who just had kind of a passing interest. Because I think there are people who are interested in the idea but are not interested in putting in the work. And that's not that they can't be involved, but they might be involved at the stage where you just need dues and you don't necessarily need work done. So another thing I would caution people on is one mistake I made, I think, at starting up OmniCorp was I said, hey, well, the only thing you'll really have to do is pay dues. That was wrong. Unless you're going to pay dues and also pay somebody to do cleanup and do all this other stuff, we ended up changing that. I said, okay, well, not only do you have to pay dues, but we've all got some responsibilities we got to take on in order to keep the place clean, to keep it running, to keep it organized, and to help me with, getting the lease signed, paying the bills, following up on stuff. So it's important to set an appropriate expectation to anyone involved in the startup makerspace community that, hey, yes, we need money, but also we need effort, unless we have enough money to exchange it for more effort. So how's everybody doing now?
Let's see if there's some questions or comments from the live stream.
And I certainly have plenty more to say. So if people are running out of questions, I can certainly fill space really.
I can attest to that. Jeff has a lot to say. Also, I really want to do drawings behind your head, Jeff, because you have this big white wall.
I know. I just moved into this house, so there's not really much in the walls.
Do you have a different set of expectations for Omni than you do for the Mount Elliott space? Yeah,
OmniCorp, we kind of decided we never wanted to have a mission, so it's really, it's an entirely different model. We tend to keep it as informal as possible. Really, the only formal pieces are we got to pay our bills. We cannot burn the place down, so we have to be careful. And we want to do events that are exciting for people, and we want to share knowledge whenever we can. But primarily, we're essentially serving ourselves, and we do engage the public when we have more time on our hands. So, so that's kind of our approach. So in terms of expectations for OmniCorp, I have no expectations other than that the place work for the people that are involved in it, at a very fundamental level, and that there is really no leadership of sorts. I mean, while I'm kind of, in some ways, a de facto leader, I try very much to push that off on other people because, there may be a time where I start to focus more deeply on makerspaces, and I may not have the time to be involved in OmniCorp as much as I'd like to. So, I guess the only expectation is that sustain itself, or more of a hope than an expectation. Not only Makerspace, on the other hand, that's near and dear to my heart. So that's really based on a mission to really rethink and recreate what school is like, what work is like, how we can develop stronger communities to help develop ourselves as individuals and, help empower each other to create a life that we really want to create for ourselves. So there's something, I guess, quite a bit deeper in that one because I deliberately am putting that or focus that effort in an area of economic challenge, because if we can prove it there, then we can do it anywhere. And I wish we could be more effective in sharing what we do, but I need to find out how to get somebody on board that does better social networking than I do.
I actually have a comment along those lines, a question along those lines. So I think kind of in passing, a lot of what we're talking about is how these kinds of spaces can become imbricated in community life. And I think the example of, you were talking about starting one up in the basement of a church and the benefit to that. I think about in LA, if you walk through central LA, you will see basically more than anything else small churches, and they might only have 50 or 100 members, but it seems like an incredible potential for this kind of involvement. But now I have totally forgotten my question.
Right.
Oh, my question, and I just remembered it, was, so can you talk a little bit about the interplay between these types of spaces? You mentioned third spaces, and I think that's right, because hackerspaces, makerspaces are really outside of those systems. Can you talk about interplay between kind of school life, home life, and makerspaces? Because I think I'm curious if you have some really good examples that you've seen on the ground.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to kind of, my broader vision for makerspaces is that makerspaces become schools. There will be no differentiation, in this lovely future that I imagine, there will be no differentiation between a geographically location-based, community-based school and a makerspace. They will be one and the same. And also, makerspaces, in various sizes and scales will exist in every neighborhood in the world. So, let's not just limit ourselves to the United States, say the world. And, it is, I imagine this, I love the word ecosystem, but can't stand it because it's overused. But, imagine this kind of world where we've got all these different scales of makerspaces, and I don't care if they're called makerspaces or not, community workshops, where they're in like church basements and schools and tech shops and fab labs and hackerspaces, and there's a lot of interaction because one space may have tools or resources that another space does not have. So while everybody may have access to one, and maybe it's like part of your neighborhood association dues or whatever, you have access to the makerspace at the end of your block, but you don't have a laser cutter there because it's too expensive. Well, fortunately, your library or your museum has got a laser cutter, so you go there and you pay a per minute fee to use the laser cutter to help get you closer to what you're trying to do. So to me that's the better world that I imagine, is people democratic access to the tools of production. So I guess that sounds like Karl Marxish or something, but like it's kind of a blend of it's a hybrid model, I guess, of the people having access to the tools of production and the means of production, but also us exploring, value and need for things through market-based activity. So these makerspaces are not only places for learning, but they're places for developing and selling things that are valuable. That could be food, that could be furniture, that could be electronics, I think it could be anything. So, and to get to your point, Andrew, about how this interplay is happening now, well, I could take one example that actually, let's see, how the interplay is happening. I mean, I can certainly speak of some interplay that happened between OmniCorp and the Mount Elliott Makerspace, and then some Mount Elliott Makerspace and the community at large. So, and you can let me know if that feels, it's funny, like there's been so much happening that it's kind of hard to pick one story out, but...
what about libraries?
Libraries.
There's a question in the live stream about partnering with libraries.
Well, actually, the Mount Elliott Makerspace, I guess we could call it a partnership, but we helped the Detroit Public Library apply for, and they were awarded a grant from the Cognizant Corporation's Making the Future program to start a makerspace in their teen center. So I'm really excited about that. And by the way, I'd also be happy to share the budget for that with anybody who'd like to take a look at it, so they need not recreate the wheel if they want to start their own similar program. It does not include how you might sustain or drive revenue to the program, because it is a teenage makerspace. So it's I think they may not be able to pay a membership at this time. However, so I guess that's one example of the Mount Elliott Makerspace using its resources and all we've learned, and also our connections to people that we know can teach the workshops that are going to be offered at the teen center. We used our network to kind of find those instructors and to put them in place. And as it turns out, I built a similar budget for both Mount Elliott and the library so that people could teach the same class on one day at two different places. They go in the morning to one place, teach one workshop, and then they in the afternoon go to another place. So that's how that interplay is happening. But I think in terms of, Andrew, how maybe the makerspace is or interacting with people in business or in emerging businesses, urban agriculture is a really big movement in Detroit, and people are really, there's a lot more activity of that happening. So as a makerspace, we ended up helping people build raised beds, helping them build signage for their gardens, and help. Originally, actually, my pitch for the Mount Elliott Makerspace was to build tools for urban agriculture at a specific, urban scale, rather than kind of large-scale agriculture or garden-scale agriculture. And we're still getting a lot of requests for, could you build a tool that does this, or could you build a compost sifter that that does this? So there's a ton of opportunities which we just haven't had the bandwidth to explore yet about how to fulfill needs, that are really, I guess, market-based needs for how to amplify the work that's going on in urban agriculture. So that's kind of one example. Another example might be food production. So there's a woman who actually makes ginger tea in the basement of the church as well. And while we haven't really formally, well, actually, no, I take that back. We actually offered the woman who does that workshop and some of her staff a introduction to computing. So now she's much better versed in social media to spread the word in her business, and also she knows better how to use a computer, and her business has been growing. And she actually uses some of the fruits or uses the mint at the very least from the church garden to make her tea. Likewise, young people going by the commercial kitchen they have in the basement, commercial kitchen, I don't know if it's commercially rated, but it's got a big stove, so it looks commercial. And kids will come by and pass by, and they'll learn about that business by it just being in the space. And I also encourage people to come to the Mount Elliott Makerspace to simply work on projects, so young people and older people are exposed to somebody doing something. And if they're interested, they'll ask. And sometimes I'll just volunteer information. I'll say, look, this is Nikki's Ginger Tea of Detroit. She started up this business, just in her own kitchen. Then it got bigger, so she uses this kitchen. And then it got even bigger, so now she's hiring from the community, and she's using as many local resources as possible. So you're introducing the ideas of low cost, I guess, barriers, or as little barrier to entry as possible to get into something entrepreneurially. And in this case, it's a woman not trying to incur the overhead of her own space, but actually trying to use a resource in her community to keep her overhead low and start up and hopefully succeed in her business, which she's doing. So when you introduce that idea to young people, you're helping them think differently about what might be the conventional business development model, which is make a big, business plan, pitch the business plan, get a hunk of money or take out a big loan, and really take on a lot of risk. So let's say a young guy wants to make T-shirts. Well, actually, here's another example. So somebody in the church has a business, and she needed some T-shirts made. We actually had a screen press and a screen printer, and that young guy was interested in graphics. So we taught him how to use a screen printer, and then he's now engaged with her to make the T-shirts for her business. But we hooked them up together in a way that was not a typical client relationship, so that we said to her, look, we need some help training him on the screen printing, and said to him, hey, look, I understand you're going to make mistakes, but you need to work together with her to figure out a good price and a way that you can do it that works within your schedule and so forth. So that's one example. There's another example where somebody needed some music made for a project, and another teenager actually made the music for their project. He actually made the music for our introduction to the Mount Elliott Makerspace video. And he just won, I think, $5,000 at a Hard Rock Cafe performance, like amateur night or something like that, a couple weeks ago. So, all this has happened in like the last 6 or 9 months, and we've only been in the church for about a month and 3 months, or for about a year and 3 months, or maybe even a year and a half. So, stuff, because you're in this area of high community energy, you're introducing new things, and stuff just starts to happen because more people know about it, more people are taking advantage of the resources, and more people are witnessing those things happen. So,
Jeff,
yes.
we're running towards the end of our hour here, and I wondered whether Nirvan, who joined us a little later, has something that you want to say before we move on. Did you want to jump in on this, Nirvan?
Sorry. Hi. Sorry, I was just trying to turn my camera, or unmute myself, and I turned the camera off. Sorry I'm late is the first thing I want to say, and it's really exciting to be here and meet you guys. I've met Tara, who's been advising us on the Cain's Arcade Imagination Foundation as we're growing, and we're trying to do something in a similar field where we have a foundation we've started growing out of the Cain's Arcade project to find, foster, and fund creativity and entrepreneurship in kids. And we've been learning a lot about the Makerspace movement and looking into ways to tap into that, build a network of Makerspaces, and build a Makerspace for kids in Boyle Heights to begin with the Imagination Foundation. So I'm really interested in the curriculum that's been developed already, especially as it relates to entrepreneurship in kids. And we're also interested in just learning how different people have put together the Makerspaces. And we're interested in creating a scalable model of project-based learning. So we're starting with the Cain's Arcade, which currently there's about 70 schools in 9 countries that are building cardboard arcades right now over the summer. And in September, we're going to be launching this global cardboard challenge. So we're making a follow-up to the Cain's Arcade that's kind of about the birth of the Imagination Foundation. And in September, we're going to invite everybody to register an event and make something awesome out of cardboard in their school, in their class, in their church, in their kitchen, in their office. And then on October 2nd, we're going to do a global day of play where people can find these events around the world and go out and make the kids' days who've been making awesome things. And then this will be our first fundraiser, so every event will have a fundraising challenge, and they can raise $10, $100. And that's how we're going to try to raise enough money to build our first Makerspace. Oh, I can't hear Henry.
Nirvan and others who have projects like this that you want to share with the rest of the Makerspace community, we can continue this discussion in the comment thread that's attached to Jeff's page on connectedlearning.tv. So that is in the, I think that has been put into the chat, the URL for that, or you can go to connectedlearning.tv and easily see where Jeff's pages is and add to the comment thread there. So we very much want to not cut off these conversations, but use these webinars as the beginning of an asynchronous conversation through the comment thread as part of our community building here. So having said that, we are at the top of the hour, and we like to try to keep these pretty close to the top of the hour. We will put links to the group notes documents from the connectedlearning.tv page, and this is a pretty great start today on the notes that people have put together from the live stream. So tune in next week, next Thursday, and I guess that's it for today. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for our respondents as well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Howard.
Thanks, guys. Sorry I was late.
All right, see you around.
Yeah, see ya.